Hello, everyone, and welcome to Economics Unplugged with Prof. Raj. This podcast features an enlightening discussion with economist and professor, delving deep into the intricacies of the Indian economy. Today, our guest is Dr. Rajat Kathuria. He is a Dean of School of Humanities and Social Sciences and a professor of economics at Srinagar University. Over years, he has worked with several international organizations such as World Bank, International Labour Organization, the Asian Development Bank, among others. He also served as a director and chief executive at Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. So, welcome to today's podcast, where we will discuss the critical to-do list for the government over the next 5 years. So in India, currently Indians have two different perspectives on the state of economy. One side argues that the economy is growing rapidly and is expected to reach 5 trillion economy by 2026. The opposing view acknowledges the growth but point out that the per capita income is still low, which is approximately 98,000, which is not sufficient. They also highlight the issue of insufficient job creation with youth unemployment of around 15% in 2023. Another argument is that while jobs are available, they do not match the skill levels of the workforce. There's a debate on whether the focus should be on manufacturing-led growth or a combination of both manufacturing and services, given the changing global dynamics. In this regard, I agree with the later approach. Both viewpoints have valid points. And acknowledging these concerns is essential if we truly want to achieve the goal of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Now, let's delve into the Dr. Rajat's perspective on this matter. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining this podcast. It's an honor to doing a podcast with you. So I would like to start my first question, like which will be like, since we have a new government, which was, of course, the previous, but I would say because they won the election again. So, what should be the current government's to-do list, which include for the next 5 years, to achieve GDP growth in a more equitable manner?
Yes, thank you, Prof. It's a pleasure to be here. As you rightly said, this government has come back to power, albeit I think there is a slight difference between the last 10 years and this government, as everybody knows, that this is a coalition government and therefore they will have to carry their partners along. And I think one of the things that was established during the election campaign, which is coming through in whatever little initiatives that we've seen of this government, including the budget that I will speak about, which is that one of the things that the opposition had campaigned on was the lack of employment opportunities for India's youth.
Yes.
And indeed, lack of employment opportunities for a large section of the population. Remember that 800 million people in India get some sort of transfers or benefits from the government out of a population of 1.4 billion, which is a significant amount. So apart from unemployment, there's a lot of inequality as well. And these two aspects were the focus of the opposition's campaign in the run-up to the elections. And I think both of these, at least employment, has found voice in whatever few initiatives that we've seen since the new government has come to power. If you ask me, what is India's biggest challenge? A lot of people would say, India should grow at double digits. India should have inflation under control. Inequality is, of course, an issue. But I think India's key challenge, if it wants to enter the group of developed nations, as it's been saying, by 2047, we want to become Viksit Bharat. I think India's key challenge in achieving that or getting to that goal is going to be creation of productive employment opportunities for its youth. Because India is now going through a positive or a favorable demographic transition. This will last until the mid of next decade, and then our demographic sort of will begin to decline and our population will begin to become older. But we are on a favorable path of a demographic transition where the number of youth that is entering the labor force is at a very high level, almost 10 million. Some estimates suggest 7 to 8 million. And this is a very large amount. And therefore, to be able to productively employ them, I think is India's biggest challenge in the overall context of handling employment or creating employment opportunities for its population, which is going through a structural, as I said, shift, moving away from agriculture, although we've seen a little bit of increase in agriculture workforce, but that's, I think, transitory because of COVID and its aftermath. But the structural transition will continue, where agriculture sheds people rather than absorbs people. So agriculture would shed employment, and this has to be taken up either by the manufacturing sector or by the services sector. And my recommendation would be to employ them in the manufacturing sector so that we can create productive opportunities for India's abundant labor force.
So, yeah, I mean, this is, of course, which is a very important to-do list for the government. As you mentioned, like 800 million people are, getting direct benefit transfer, and the unemployment rate, which is approximately around like 9.2%. And considering like data is would not be perfect, probably it will be more than 9.2%, which based on the different statistic that comes into the market. So uh, it's understand that the job is not there, but don't you think there's also a problem of skill development? I mean, if you like look at the big companies, they are ready to come. They have so many research department opening in a different states, but the feedback is also like, no, Indian youth are not so capable in terms of different skill. So there is also a different side. Okay, we can blame government that we have to generate, because taking back the example of manufacturing, like we know, like it's a smile curve in the manufacturing, which Raghuram Rajan talks a lot about it. So the first level, which is more into research and everything. So even like even the companies are ready to come for manufacturing, but mostly the observation is only taking in terms of assembling, and so it's a kind of a skill issue. So what do you think, like how
I Yes, I agree with you, Praful, that India hasn't kept up on skilling especially its youth.
yeah.
There's a huge deficit in skilled youth entering the labor force so that they can be immediately employed by entrepreneurs who are willing to invest in, let's say, labor-intensive manufacturing. So that is certainly a gap. But if you were to ask me, is that the only problem that India is facing today in terms of employing its youth? And I would say no. Of course, as Raghu also says in his book, there's this problem of digitalization that is happening, automation that is happening, etc. That is not perhaps creating the kind of opportunities that, let's say, China enjoyed when it was in a similar situation when it was getting into labor-intensive manufacturing. But India is a country where I think there are multifarious challenges. And I think those challenges are coming to the fore at this point. I mean, they've come to the fore very often, but I think now we are at a point of no return in the sense, as we've been saying, the statistics are stark.
Yes.
And India is aspiring to become developed. And therefore, at this moment, if we don't address the problem, then I think we will lose out once again, as we have in the past. And let me elaborate a little bit. So, skilling doesn't happen out of the blue. It won't happen immediately. It's a process rather than an event. So, in the sense that the government can decide to have certain skilling programs, which it does, but I think the whole ecosystem around that also needs to be improved. I think, and one has to go back to post-independence India and also look at that history, that how are we in this situation? Of course, we can do a diagnosis and an analysis, but that won't give us sort of the answer to the problem that we are seeking. I can diagnose the problem. And the diagnosis of the problem is that we focus too much on higher education. Our higher education did really well, but our primary and secondary education fared quite poorly. And therefore, those people who were coming out of schools were not able to be skilled and made ready to be absorbed in the labor-intensive manufacturing sector. So that's one reason.
Yes.
The other reason is that size wasn't regarded in India as a positive. The moment you became big, you were under various kinds of
Of
regulations and
regulations
rules.
and authority,
That
the keeping eye on it. They are to,
that's right.
yeah.
So they became subject to certain rules and regulations. So the incentive to remain small was much more than the incentive to become big. And therefore, and then on top of that, all the regulations of labor, all the regulations of scale, etc., combined with inadequate skilling of the people, led to a situation where firms, instead of employing people, were finding ways of how to reduce permanent employees, get contractual employees, so
Yes.
that they wouldn't come under the labor regulations, and were not able to create the kind of scale that a country like China has been able to create and absorbs its labor force and absorbs the people who are coming into the labor force. So I think there are multifarious problems, but there's no point bemoaning what has happened.
Yes.
Of course, I can diagnose the problem. Yeah, so we have to now get ready to say, okay, I know why the problem occurred, so I need to now move ahead. So one is, of course, getting rid of all those archaic laws and codes and make them more sort of friendly
efficient.
for
Yeah.
employment creation. And that the government is doing. Second is, the mindset of the people also needs to change. Of course, that's a long process, so I won't belabor that point, but that's also, then all those frictions that occur in the market, paying of taxes, meeting all those transactions costs of engaging with the government, clearances, environment, land, etc. All of those, if they can be made a little more friendly, so that people are not, frightened of investing. Right now, investors say, why should I invest in India? I'll go abroad. So a lot of examples of Indians not investing in India, but Indians investing abroad. Of course, I'm not saying that we should not have outward flow of FDI. We should, but there should also be adequate investment in India. Investment in India from a high of 36% of GDP in the period between 2004 and 2008. And if you look at that period, our investment to GDP ratio had gone up to 36%. This was mostly private investment. Today, not only are our composition changed in favor of government, but private investment has also fallen, and we are sitting at below 30%. So that also needs to increase. But it won't happen by government diktat. It will happen by creating an environment where entrepreneurs actually come in and invest. So I agree with your point that skilling needs to be done, and therefore the industrial training institutes need to be refurbished and sort of themselves upskilled and upgraded, so that the people coming out, the youngsters that are coming out of the ITIs, can be employed. Let me give you an example of how the government is attempting to address this issue. In the budget, it has recently been announced that interns will be trained, and part of their salary will be paid by the government. 5,000 rupees per month, the government will pay for the first time interns in these top 500 companies. Their training costs would be met out of the CSR funds of those companies in which these youngsters, these youth are trained. So the government is providing these 500 companies with an incentive to train the youngsters, recognizing that they are not adequately equipped to hit the ground running. So, they'll train them for a period, and after a year, they might have the skills or after 2 years, they might have the skills that are necessary, either be employed in the firm that they interned with, or in another firm or another company. And they are planning, so 10 million youth, they are planning over the next 5 years to train so that they can be ready for employment and they can be trained. And over the years, if this multiplies, then this could become a way of training youngsters. But this is a policy.
Yeah, it's a
Every
policy
policy,
change. Policy change
this is
required.
a policy change. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is like the apprenticeship situation, but it's not completely apprentices. I mean, these are the youth who are going to be not only trained on machines, but they're going to be trained on, just being in the company, looking, observing, interacting with people, networking, etc. So an this is an initiative taken by the government, recognizing that there's the problem of skilling, which, as you had mentioned, is one of India's
Yes.
grave challenges.
I mean, I
Uh,
agree sorry. Yes, Prof, you can complete.
so please go ahead, Prof.
You
Please
know,
go
no,
ahead.
I'm saying that while I agree with few things, and before getting to the second thing on the list, there are two things I would like to point out. First, like as you mentioned that our higher education is good. Probably I will not agree 100% on that first part. And second, in terms of internship, so in last 2 to 3 years, if I'm correct, the percentage of GDP which is going towards research and education is 0.5, 0.6% of GDP. So instead of like giving this internship for like 1,000 and partnering with the company, and the higher education is actually not good in India in terms of research. Higher education, I mean, if we go like 5, 6 years back, there were only government colleges which were good. Now colleges like Ashoka University, Shiv Nadar, and there are other colleges coming up with a private investment. And so the people like, I mean, if like DU has a seat of 1,000 student, but that does not mean the another like the extent of 1,100 with like the marginal 100 students are not good. So they are going to colleges like Shiv Nadar and Ashoka, and there are bunch of good colleges like engineering MIT. So I mean, but we need many more such colleges to accommodate. So instead of like, so what do you think on that? Like instead of giving like thousands rupees on
No,
internship.
so it's a question of who your comparator is, right? You're absolutely right. In a global sense, our higher education system needs to improve much more, right? I mean, there's no question about that. So if you do your uh, benchmarks with global universities and global engagement with research as well as with industry, India lags far behind. There's no question. I completely agree
No,
with you. I
I
made that statement about higher education. I was comparing higher education in India as in the 60s and 70s and the way it evolved to the primary education and secondary education and the high school system. And in that sense, higher education did much better than the primary and secondary education system. And if you compare countries like Korea and China with us at their similar phase of development, their focus, of course, it's not that they neglected higher education, but their focus was much more on getting everybody into primary, secondary, and high
yes.
school education, the entire population, including girls.
In
Uh,
1970s, they took so many steps in 1970s and
that's right.
80s
That's right.
to get everything on the track on the tops of
Exactly.
education.
And when their manufacturing sector, when their structural transition began to happen, there was a ready pool of skilled and semi-skilled individuals, boys and girls, men and women, who were ready to work with machines, who were sort of literate, who could read, write, who could think, to be able to engage in the manufacturing sector. And that's where India's sort of problem has been, is that we've created a a relatively better higher education system. And then the proof of all of that, or the evidence of all of that, Praful, is that you look at the number of Indians who, after having studied in higher education institutions in India, have gone abroad and excelled in innovation, have excelled in research, have become the best doctors, the best engineers, the best innovators in the world. And
Yes.
today, the number of CEOs of Indian origin who have been educated in India and CEOs of global companies of Indian origin is at an unprecedented high. So our higher education system, to that extent, performed much better. And I think the focus, and while you're absolutely right, it's still inadequate globally, and we need 1,000 universities in the private sector to bloom. And why do I say private sector, Praful? I say private sector is because I think the government is no longer capable
Of
of
doing, yes.
creating the kind of universities that would compete on a global scale. We've created a Jawaharlal Nehru University, we've created a Delhi University, we've created a Mumbai University, etc., which are very good. But I think creating more such universities will have to be in the private sector. I am not convinced that the government is able to perform that role. And the reason I say that is because a lot of economists, a lot of people will argue that education is a merit good and should be out of the control of the private sector. So I'm not going to get into that argument whether it should
Yes.
or whether it should not. That becomes an ideological argument.
Argument.
In the United States, you have both privately funded education and you have publicly funded education, and we are going down that path. But going ahead at the margin today, I think government is incapable of performing this role, in the sense that it doesn't have the fiscal space to be able to invest the kind of money that is required to build a world-class university. So Shivnadar University, where I am, and of course I'm a conflicted party here,
Yes.
they have invested. You've got 300 acres in the National Capital Region of land where you've created world-class infrastructure. In Chennai, there is another Shivnadar University in Chennai where you have 250 acres of land and created world-class campus. And then, as you were saying, there are other universities like O.P. Jindal, there is Azim Premji, there is Kriya, there is Ashoka. But as I said, we need thousands of these.
Yes, yes. So actually, I was talking not only in terms of quality, because we need quantity also.
That's right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
quality. There is no doubt that we have produced a good CEOs and like best engineers or innovators, researchers all over the world. But the quantity has to grow. It's just
Absolutely.
not the
I
quality.
agree.
So yeah, on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So coming to your, like, what do you think the second thing on the list, to do list, that government should do apart from job creation?
So I think we have job creation as well as skilling. So I think both of them, in a sense, that will go together. And that is one of India's grave challenges, as you had said, Praful. The youth unemployment rate, according to certain statistics, is at an all-time high of
15%.
some people say
So youth unemployment was 15% in 2023 approximately. Like overall
right.
unemployment is 9.2 as of June 24,
Yes,
but
and
youth employee is much, almost like double digit. It's a, yeah.
that's right, and it's very high. And if you include what economists call disguised unemployment, which
Disguised
will be even
unemployment,
higher.
it will be this is U3 unemployment we are talking probably,
Yes, that's right.
not the
Yes,
not the disguised that is in
that's right.
agriculture and
It's
all.
an actual employment. But I'm saying, if you look at the number of youth who are doing just about anything, so
Anything,
one
yes.
has to distinguish between employment and jobs.
Jobs,
Right? So
correct.
we want jobs for the people. We want good quality, productive jobs. Employment is somebody comes and asks you, "Are you working?" And say, "Yes, I'm working," because in India the population is too poor not to do something. uh, or they will do some unproductive service work. They will, do some trading, sell fruits, vegetables, create a tea stall on the highway, etc. So that's employment in the sense I'm doing something for a living because I have to. I need to earn those 100, 200, 300 rupees in a day to keep myself and my family afloat. But jobs is what I'm sort of focusing on. India needs to create good quality jobs for its youth. So that's jobs and skilling that is necessary. So I think the second challenge that India faces, which is related to employment and jobs, is also trying to, create sustainability in the economy. So we have now sustainability. I don't mean in a financial sense. I'm here sort of slightly shifting away to what is called environmental
Environment
sustainability.
sustainability, yes.
So if I were to sort of frame India's aspirations in one sentence of what India should do to become Viksit Bharat by 2047, which is itself a big ambition, a big task, it should be achieve growth. It could be double-digit growth, but I won't focus too much on that. I would say achieve high growth, which is inclusive and sustainable.
Yes.
So inclusivity would be in terms of job creation, and so that the inequality gets reduced to an extent. And sustainability would be the environmental sustainability, because India is very vulnerable to bad air, to climate change. And we've seen the evidence of that over the last few years. In fact, COVID was a very good example where everything shut down. And during the lockdowns, the quality of air in India's most polluted cities suddenly improved, and birds came back and skies were blue. That was a sort of forced experiment that we performed and said that that uh, you know growth, or it was an example, or it was the manifestation of the Kuznets curve that economists talk about. Environmental Kuznets curve is when you're growing, they will have negative spillovers, negative externalities on the environment, but you will live with that. And then at some point, after you achieve, $5,000 per capita income or $10,000 per capita income, people will demand a better environment. And therefore, things will begin to change. We haven't reached that level of per capita income today,
Yeah,
but
I'll
we
come to
need.
that per capita point definitely
Right.
on that.
But we are not there yet, but we need the change because the carbon space, both above India and in the world, has been occupied already, and there is very little that we can add. So we need to become, and not for our own, not only for the world's sake, the globe, not for the global public good's sake, but for our own sake, because we've seen the massive impacts of climate change on some of our most vulnerable, areas in the hills, in the north of India, in
Yes.
Kashmir, in Uttarakhand, down south, along the coastlines. We've seen huge impacts, negative impacts. So I think we should, when we grow, we should grow in a sustainable manner. And I must say that the government has taken adequate steps on decarbonization of the Indian economy. All the things that we talk about policies will apply to sustainability as well, which is that policies need to be implemented, and they need to be implemented well. But in the decarbonization, in climate change, I would say there is a big policy that we are on the we are debating, we're discussing, which is how fast should we move away from coal,
Cool.
recognizing that coal is one of the primary causes of carbon emissions. So how quickly can we move away from coal? And there is both a moral sort of dilemma as well as a dilemma that focuses on justice, right? And that's for the rest of the world to also take care of, which is that, why should we where we have not been cause of the problem of climate change, why
Yes.
would we be subject to the solution and be asked to remove or asked to decarbonize faster than we can afford to do? But if we are forced to do that, then there should be adequate transfers, both in terms of finance, in terms of technology, from the rest of the world to India, because India is going to become, or is already, one of the largest emitters. So for our own sake and for the sake of the rest of the world, we need to decarbonize. So I think that's one of India's big challenges as well: decarbonization, moving away from coal in the energy area, and also trying to become less dependent on fossil fuels. So these are sort of challenges that stare India in the face today.
So definitely, like you are perfectly right that we need to see the sustainability part. But I mean, there's a problem we all know. But considering the India's economy and the kind of deficit we have and the kind of per capita we have, it will not be possible. I mean, what I think that it will not be possible to go towards sustainability very quickly, because like we have to find a fine balance between growth and sustainability. Because if we invest more on sustainability, it probably, I would say, the things will get more expensive in a short term at least.
That is correct. That is
Yeah, so
correct.
so
If we
yeah, so how do we, like I mean, and second important thing, that we are not even producing as much as, even if we produce small, it's bad. But if we compare with the other countries like United States, the population is like 330 million. We have a population of like 1500 approximately million, which is like five times, approximate less than five
That's right.
times. But they are
That's
producing,
right.
if I am not wrong, it approximately 15% of the all the waste that they are generating. So what do you think, how do we to find the fine balance between growth and sustainability?
So that, as I said, that is a big challenge, and there are
Yes,
no
it's
easy
difficult.
answers. It's very hard, and that,
Yes.
as I said, there is both a global moral issue here. There's a justice issue, and also there's something that we need to do within a country, so that we don't harm us, we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. So we can ask the rest of the world, we can tell the rest of the world, we can use moral arguments, but as we've seen, the pace of change at the global level is very slow. While we have a Paris Accord, we see that we are very far away from achieving 1.5 degree Celsius increase in the temperatures that is in the Paris Accord. We are not even close to achieving 2 degrees Celsius. And if we go by the current trends, by the end of the century, we would have probably been 3 to 4 degrees Celsius higher than the pre-industrial levels. So, I mean, the world is facing a huge challenge, and India has a responsibility because it has become one of the large emitters today, but it does not bear the historical responsibility. The historical responsibility of this damage to the global environment has not been caused by India. The global responsibility rests elsewhere. And India has been saying this forcefully in every fora. We've been saying that in Paris. We said that in all the meetings of
Yes.
COP that have been held subsequently. We have been saying that we will do what is required of us as an emerging, as a developing country, but the rest of the world has to do more. While we continue to say this, we should also recognize that we need to do something for our own benefit. And the rest of the world knows that, right?
Yes.
So in terms of the negotiations, they play on that. I mean, if you don't do it, you'll harm yourself. So they know that.
And
So
we
while
have
we can
that
raise the
kind of
moral,
population, and sorry,
that's
we
right.
have that kind
So
of population, we have to sustain ourselves.
population, right?
Yes.
So if there are floods, if there are landslides, if there is decline in agricultural production, it affects us. It affects our population. Our populations get injured, or even death,
Yes.
even killed in these sort of events that are, I think, provoked by what we've done to the environment. These may be one-off events, but they've become uh, they've become much more. The frequency has increased, and the kind of damage they cause has also increased, and this will only continue. So I think the rest of the world knows that. So they're playing that game while we also assert our right of demanding justice in this space. So, coming back to your question, Prof, yes, it's a wicked problem, which is
Yes.
why I've placed it very high on the list of challenges that confronts India, apart from jobs and skilling. I've placed this at number two because it is a wicked problem, uh, and in the sense that let me go back to what you were asking. We have to find a balance between growth and sustainability. Absolutely, there is no question about that. We have to find that balance. But if we grow the way that the rest of the world has grown, even China, the way China has grown, because they've been now growing rapidly for the last 30 years at almost 9 to 10%. And if we follow their growth model, not going back to Europe or United States,
Yes.
the resource intensity of China's growth model is, if it is replicated by us, then I think we'll sink along with the rest of the world, right? So the
Yes.
world doesn't have the same kind of resources now to expend on the growth process that US, Europe, or even China used in the past.
Yeah.
Their per capita emissions are very high. Our per
Very
capita
high.
emissions are 2. We're
Yes.
sitting at 2. China sits at 6 to 7. Europe 9, 10. America 13.
13.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's the order of magnitude. I could be wrong in exact numbers, but that's the order of magnitude. So if we replicate China, the rest of the world, and along with us, will be doomed. So the finding that balance as of current trends, not even not just in India, but globally, finding that balance between growth and sustainability seems hard. I always say to students, both doing social sciences as well as doing engineering and science, etc. Science has a solution. Science will tell us this is the solution
Yeah.
to the problem of climate change,
Only science
but
can
it
tell
cannot be
the
implemented.
solution.
It cannot be implemented. It's an unimplementable solution.
Yes.
Science has the solution. So it's the humanities, it's the people, society, because you're engaging with people. You're not engaging with machines. You're engaging with people. You are engaging with people's lives. You're engaging with people's welfare. So while science may have a solution, that's not an implementable solution. So when will science bring us an implementable solution? And that's the sort of change, if that happens. And I'll give you one example of what I mean by that. If we are able to get storage
Of
done, electricity, if we are able to get storage, implementable storage, that is affordable storage, done, then I think we will be close to a technological breakthrough that will be able to address at least part of that dilemma between growth and sustainability. And it will advance, in some sense, people's demanding a better environment at lower per capita incomes.
Lower per
So
capita.
we will not have to wait for $5,000 to then tell people, okay, we can now afford it, so therefore we are going to demand. But remember, demand is backed by purchasing power.
Yes.
One is a question of need. One is a need. Need doesn't require purchasing power, but demand, as economists
Requires
say, need purchasing power. Yes, you
purchasing
need
power.
buyers, right?
Yes.
So do we wait to become $5,000 per capita before we demand a better environment, or can we achieve it at $2,000 or $3,000? And we can, provided, as I said, if science gives us an implementable breakthrough.
So,
And storage is one example.
So I think what you are talking about, Professor, that science and social science both comes and find the solution, because
That's right.
science has a solution, no doubt, but it might not be implementable and may not be feasible also. It might be
That's right.
we can implement, it's not feasible. So social science experiment has to come in between, and then like both have to contribute in some, but overall, yes, science will only give the solution of all these things. So before going to the third or fourth things on the to-do list, I'll come to the second question. So here, everyone is talking about India GDP is going to $5 trillion by 2026. Especially, I would like to mention Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who was the chief economic advisor few years back. And he wrote recently in his book, he's mentioning about India at the rate 100, which is like 2047, like we will be reaching the $55 trillion economy. Now, the question is, okay, no doubt if we compare like last decade to this decade, we have significantly increased our per capita. Right now it's 98,000. And I will not say it's equitable. It's not like if we say per capita in US is suppose X dollars, most of the population will have those those kind of earning. But we talk about India 98,000, definitely the what Gini coefficient or inequality is very high, very high. So why are we not talking in terms of increasing per capita and only GDP growth? Because see, why I'm saying this, because we have 115 1.5 billion population. Now anything, if you sell, it will be purchased by 1.5 billion people. So anyway, it's a demand growth, it's not the actual real growth, of different commodities, uplifting of the lower class society, or increasing of the standard of living. So why we are not talking about the increasing the in terms of per capita rather than talking about $55 trillion or $5 trillion economy?
You're absolutely right. I mean, that is, I think, a narrative change is necessary in India
Yes.
to begin to focus on, rather than focusing on the large numbers like 5 trillion economy or the high growth rates. I think we need to also focus on distribution, which we've inadequately done. I remember there was a debate in India not very long ago between two eminent professors uh, of Indian origin who now both live abroad. One is Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, and the other
Yes.
is Professor Amartya Sen. And there was a very nice debate, intellectually, very profound and a stimulating debate around, growth and distribution. And I think Professor Sen pointed out that where India has gone wrong, eh, he's not saying that we should not focus on GDP growth, but he said we focused inadequately on the social sector. We focused inadequately on health and education, where the public expenditure on both health and education in India has been inadequate. Both the numbers have been small, and government needs to spend much more. He was focusing on, yes, there are market failure where the private sector won't go, and that's what the government needs to do, is focus on the social sectors and investment so that the distribution becomes better. So I think a narrative change is necessary in India, away from this big picture of $5 trillion and achieving $2 trillion worth of exports. Of course, they will happen in and of itself. They will happen.
Yes,
The law
I
of
will say, I mean,
arithmetic.
the,
If not real growth, inflation will get us there.
yes,
So that will
inflation,
happen.
6% inflation, for 5 to 6% inflation will definitely get it there. But
So will get us there to a $5 trillion economy. I think these are easy things politically. I think this is. I'm not blaming the political establishment. These are things that any government would do, right? Politically, it's easy to say that.
yes, I
You
understand.
don't have to do anything to say that India will become like a China, or India will become $10 trillion. So initially it was three, then it became five. Now people have already started talking about $10 trillion, and willy nilly it will happen. It may not happen in the time frame that the government thinks it will happen, but it will happen eventually. It will happen. But what will not happen automatically is what you're saying, Praful,
Yeah.
is the distribution aspect will not automatically happen. There we need government to get intrinsically and deeply involved And how can they do it? I mean, there are solutions. As I said, there is public policy solutions to that, but the government will need to implement them well. Of course, digital tools provide one method, and
That's a
we've
way
seen
to
that.
improve. That's one of the
That's a way to,
platform. That's a platform
there's a
that
platform. Absolutely.
enhances. That enhances. I mean,
Absolutely.
we talk about multiplier in economics. So the multiplier
That's right.
will definitely increase, but you cannot put
Absolutely.
everything on digital and say, "Oh, it's
Absolutely.
decreasing."
Absolutely. Absolutely. We
So,
cannot. Yes. And
and coming,
so
yeah,
I
sorry.
think for and for sorry, so and therefore for distribution, uh, we these are these age-old policies that we have had, and they've become like almost sacrosanct. We don't want to go near them, right? And recently, one of the former chief economic advisors of India, he was at a platform of Shiv Nadar University. We had invited him to speak, Professor Kaushik Basu,
Oh, yes.
and he said that agriculture income tax, we should definitely consider it because
Very important.
it's not agriculture. You're taxing income. So if
Income.
people are making, there should be a threshold of income. It's not which sector it is coming from. He also advocated a higher marginal tax rate for the very rich in India. And that may not be
I mean, this is
something that,
world, this is global issues that they are trying to, and I don't think why it is a problem. Like, like big billionaires, they are not paying taxes because here I saw on video, like when government comes to them and asks for the tax, they say, okay, we have a capital gain, but we have not sold that shares, my shares, so there is no profit. But at the same point of time, when they have to purchase a different company, they take a loan from a bank and private equity and all, and they keep their share as a collateral. So
that's
when
right.
it comes to taxation, they say we don't have any income. But when they use that as a money to buy and increase their profit, then they have that money.
That's right. So the economic survey of this year has done a very good analysis of the
Isn't it a cherry
challenges.
picked? Sorry to interrupt, but this year's economic survey is more like a cherry picked thing has been,
So
uh,
no, but I'm pointing to some of the statements that have been made in the economic survey, which actually are saying, of course, apart from employment, youth employment,
yes.
etc., there is one statement in the economic survey which I think should be socialized a lot more. It says the corporate sector in India is swimming in profits, and they need to do more. Uh, and I think that is absolutely right. It is swimming in profits. There's a K-shaped recovery,
Yes,
post-COVID and
post COVID, it's
post-global financial
correct.
crisis. We've seen the rich are getting richer while the poor don't have opportunities, which is what the Gini coefficient.
Yes.
And the reason, the corporate sector, apart from the fact that corporate taxes today are lower than income taxes,
Income
because
tax overall.
you get away with corporate taxes by various methods and by hiring smart CAs. But if you're an employee in a company, your TDS is cut at source, and therefore you have no option of I think, avoiding. I'm not saying evading. You have no options of avoiding tax. There are no mechanisms in the law that allow you to do that, unlike corporate. So corporate tax today is lower than individual tax, while corporates, according to the economic survey, are swimming in profits. So I think what Kaushik Basu is saying, that we should begin to think about wealth taxes. We should begin to think about taxing the corporates more. I mean, this red herring that often comes up, it says that they are the ones who create those multipliers. They are the ones who creating jobs, etc.
Yes.
You can't hold that, at ransom and say that I won't do my share in nation building, right? Because everybody is doing good. Individuals do good, and say if I do some good, I should not be required to pay taxes.
Pay taxes.
And everybody does it in whatever aspects they are in.
Yes.
If you're doing investment, you're showing in profits. So there,
I, I,
that sort of responsibility
yeah, I
of
mean,
nation state should be on them
yeah,
also.
I mean, they are swimming in profit because we are doing a consumption. We are doing
Hard work,
expenditure,
yes,
and of course, it's like
yeah,
it's a circle. They can say that, okay, we are giving the salary. That's why you guys
yeah,
are spending it, and then we have a profit. So,
yeah.
but I definitely agree that we need to have this narration change. That let's talk about per capita. One thing why, like, if I have to think on that, why it's a problematic, you may point out that whether it's right or wrong. So in if you compare like 1.5 decades back, when your generation was like young, like 35, 40, at that point of time, even the income was not high, the savings were higher, the expenditure was very less. Now today's generation, even if income growth has like drastically increased, especially after COVID, but more than that, in a multiple 3 to 4x, the expenditure has increased, the consumption has increased in a various form. So uh, in a later years, so we know, like, when countries start growing, there's always a vulnerability that comes with that, of different kind of recession. Like 2008, we nothing happened because our previous generation has so much of savings that it sustained it, but our generation don't have saving. So if the per capita does not increase, we might start facing this problem, because we have another, I would not say issue, but we are more going into the credit form, which is important for any economy to grow. So and coming back to the saving point that you mentioned, definitely the consumption has also decreased from money point of view, because the government, the corporate say, are not doing an investment. As you mentioned, it was previously 36, but now it is like 15 to 20%. So like, what do you think, is it correct analysis, like we might face these problems if per capita income does not increases over a period of time?
Absolutely. I mean, so the sustainability of future generations, will depend upon, of course, both, household sustainability, debt sustainability, as
Yes.
well as government debt sustainability, right? Absolutely. There's no question about that. In fact, some people advise us now that we should begin to worry about what would happen when there are more people outside the labor force than in the labor force. Now, who's going to pay for them? Who's going to pay for their pensions? Who's going to pay for their sustainability, etc.? And government doesn't have enough resources. So one way to do that is to uh, sort of increase the levels of per capita
Yes.
income, of course, which will address this problem, both from sort of a government perspective, where government will have fiscal space to be able to pay for the pensions, I mean, defense pensions, other pensions that the government is responsible for. And also at a household level, to ensure that they don't live beyond their means. Nobody owes us a living, right? I mean,
Yes.
nobody owes us, so we can't continue to live beyond our means. United States is a different story, right?
Yeah, like that, they have a
They have a
different
dollar.
story. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
they have
uh,
the dollar, so
the
they
I
can live beyond their means.
yes, I mean, the irony is that the that debt started with the first to find the actual, the kind of debt we have, like US has reached to the $35 trillion outstanding debt. So
Right,
the
right,
actually it was started to finance World War I during that, and they have increased that debt limit 72 to 73 times,
right, right.
and
So
they keep increasing it. So we cannot compete. I mean, there is no comparison with India and
there
US.
is no comparison.
There is no,
They
we
have
should
the
not
US
compare
dollar.
also. We should not
Yes, we
compare
should
also.
not compare. So we have,
Yes.
so they have the dollar and we have the rupee, and so therein lies the difference. So we can't print our way out of trouble, and therefore I think sustainability is extremely important. Debt sustainability is extremely important, both at the individual level and at the country level. So, savings rates are at historical lows.
Yes.
One reason is because, your savings have been used up because they were inadequate earning opportunities. And one is, as you're saying, there is also this sociological phenomena
Yes, which has
that
increased.
this, media, the social media, which shows us, which encourages consumption. I'm not a sociologist, but I'm sure that all of this keeping up with the Joneses sort of thing that economists talk about, keeping up with your neighbors, has had an impact on India, because you're seeing all these starry-eyed people who are watching this, and they want to emulate, they want to buy. So I
Yes,
think there has been some of that conspicuous consumption that is beginning to happen in India also. And I think social media and the social platforms and digitalization has a role to play in that. But, people, as the 2008 crisis showed us, at some point when you demand your money back, you can't live beyond your means.
yes,
And therefore, savings need to increase. So Indian households at the household level, you talk to most families, middle class families, even poor families in India, all of them have invested in gold. And,
yes. I was
some
about to
of,
say that. I mean, this mentality of showing off was always there. It's a human nature. But previously, it was buying golds, showing off, like, we have money, we have asset, we have land, which is, it's
right,
okay. You can show off, but you have that asset. Now it is more like, there is a line that today's generation don't want to be rich, but they want to look rich. They want
that's
to
right, exactly.
show it.
Yes,
So which is like, we are less investment in gold and whatever the kind of asset we can, physical, I mean, the physical asset,
that's right,
financial assets, but more like experience. In the name of
that's
experience,
right.
we're doing a lot. Apple is making more profit, but in general, yeah. So continue, sir.
That's right. Yes. So, so investments in gold, as you rightly said, Prabhu, that was a security. That was also, you liked ornaments, you liked gold, but the investment in gold was also used as a security. I remember when South Korea had its crisis in the late 90s. In fact, when all of East Asia, Southeast Asia was embroiled in this crisis, there was a balance of payment crisis in East Asia and Southeast Asia. And Koreans wanted willingly gave up their gold to the central government
To save the
uh,
economy, yes.
to save the economy. And so gold has been used as an asset of security. The flight in so when you want to save investment, you go to gold. So some of them have that. But as you're rightly saying, that ethic has changed,
Changed.
or is at least changing at the margin, where people are now more willing to do more conspicuous consumption for the moment, for the transitory, at the expense of long-term sustainability. And this cannot be sustained either at the individual level or at the country level.
At the
Countries
country
go
level,
through
yes.
balance of payments crisis. We
Definitely.
can't live beyond our means. The government recognizes we've just had the budget. We can't live beyond our means. So it's been focusing on fiscal consolidation. So today, the fiscal deficit, we are targeting at less than 5% for the first time in several years. We're going to come down to 4.9%. So the government is focusing on fiscal consolidation, recognizing that they cannot live beyond the means. Balance of payments. We can import all we like, and we should import as a developing country. But the moment our foreign exchange reserves fall short,
Fall short,
today
yes.
they are adequate, they will fall short, then we will become, subject to a balance of payments crisis if it goes beyond a certain percentage. 3% is that magic number that if your current account, your ratio is more than 3%, then you become vulnerable. Of course, for different countries, you have different numbers. I remember Mexico, Latin America, those countries had gone up to 8% current
Yes,
account deficit
yes.
of GDP, and they of course very vulnerable. We don't want to go anywhere there. We are currently 1.5%. That's been the range of our current account deficit as a percentage of GDP, and we don't want to go to that range. So if our imports are covering about a year and a half worth if our foreign exchange reserves are covering about a year and a half of imports, then we are in a relatively stable situation. So on the balance of payments front, we are doing well. Even in a debt sense, of course, public debt uh,
Yeah.
is high, but even in a debt sense, we're not as bad as some of the other countries, so we're doing okay. Household is a worry because savings are at historical lows. Our
Yes.
savings rates have come down to historical lows. So I think household savings need to go up, and that will relate to increasing per capita income as well.
Yes, that would definitely. So yes, Professor, one last question. I mean, this discussion will keep going on because it's we are talking about India, and
Yes, yes.
yeah. So I mean, one last question, and it's kind of I'm very curious about it. So I was reading about China, what China did in 1970. I mean, especially the South East Asian country, which includes like South Korea, like what they do to your manufacturing sector and all. But my question is like why we are so much focused on manufacturing led growth. Why I'm asking this question, because 1970s to 1990s was a different era. The digitalization was very less, the machines was less, all these new innovations was less, and the kind of population, I mean the kind of the skill required to do those jobs was far different, and in a different way than today. So why we are just talking about manufacturing led growth rather than inclusive of both service led and the manufacturing led growth, because our population is, I understand, segment is not skill, but they are segment, they are very skilled, and we have the percentage of population who are very skilled is quite high, like all big companies are hiring in India. So then it should be like not in isolation, but it should go in hand. So what do you think on that, instead of comparing all the time with Vietnam, China, South Korea? And definitely we can't be China because we are a democratic country, so there are a bunch of other
That's
other reasons. So what's your view on this?
So at the macro level, of course, you're right. It cannot be a debate of services versus manufacturing. I don't think that ever was. That's very sterile. I mean, it has to be both. The question is uh, which of these sectors will absorb India's abundant factor,
Maximum of it, correct.
maximum. So India's abundant factor is, let's say, skilled, relatively less skilled, relatively less educated. I'm talking about abundant factor. I mean, so that's India's abundant factor, right? Relatively less skilled um, people who are coming into the labor force. And they're educated in the sense they may have gone through primary or secondary education, may not have finished high school, but that's the abundant factor. So, what sector of the economy can absorb them productively? In the services sector, which is relatively less labor intensive, your skill requirement is higher
Higher.
for for the kind of jobs that you're talking. Even okay, I'm not talking about delivery jobs, of course.
Yes,
India
yes.
is now
Yeah.
there's so many delivery jobs
uh,
that a lot of. So, which are the sectors that are absorbing a lot of these people who are coming into the labor force? I mean, if you do a survey, say, do you want to do this? Is this your first option? It'll probably answer will be no,
no.
because there is no social security, there are no working hours. You're delivering through the day. Either you become a taxi driver, you're hailing cab driver, etc.
Yes.
So you can do all those. Of course, yes, those are jobs in the retail sector, but social security, leaves, benefits, they're not adequate. So what I'm saying is that yes, that will happen, and that will absorb people. But the jobs that we are talking about, the information technology enabled services, the requirements there are for higher skill levels.
Quite high, quite
And
high.
quite high. And therefore, they will absorb people. Of course, they will absorb people coming out of universities, coming out of colleges, etc. They will absorb people. But will they serve the cause of India's inclusive growth? I think not. I mean,
Yes.
construction is a fast growing sector. Do you and construction workers have no social security benefits. You see people around, they sleep on site,
Yeah.
they get daily wages, what we call diari, they get daily wages. And, so once you formalize these, then the costs will begin to go up. You remember when Brazil was creating infrastructure facilities for its Olympics, the kind of stories around the labor market that emerged were very similar to India. I mean, no social security, people were very vulnerable, risks were very high, they had no insurance. And when buildings collapsed, people collapsed in a
Yeah,
heap,
I mean,
and there were so many casualties in Brazil during the sort of creation of infrastructure for the Olympics that they hosted. And India is in a similar situation, if not worse. So the the construction sector, while it's absorbing a lot of people, it's not the kind of jobs that will
we're looking for.
create productive opportunities for India's abundant labor force. So I think for India's sake, at least for the moment, yes, I understand the challenges. I mean, there's another challenge which we haven't spoken about. One is the digitalization, the automation challenge,
Yes.
which confronts us. The second challenge that confronts us, that did not confront China before us, and of course the other East Asian countries, was the external market. So this was the heyday of globalization when China entered the WTO in the early part of the century. It was the heyday of globalization. So they had the advantage of the European market, they had the advantage of the US market at relatively no tariffs or very low tariffs and almost no protectionism. India confronts a market, global market, which is becoming increasingly not only protectionist, but very demanding. So
Yes.
if
Both.
there are not tariffs, there are going to be non-tariff barriers or meeting standards. If you export textiles, you have to demonstrate to me that you have taken care of your labor well.
Correct.
While they accused China, while the West accused China of human rights violations, they couldn't do anything because the linkage between trade and standards hadn't been established by them. WTO said, I don't I'm only looking at tariffs. I don't get
Uh,
into issues whether
into issues of
your
like
human
labor
rights,
and social issues.
labor rights and social rights, whether you're unionized or not. Today, that is not the case. I'm
Yes.
using human rights and labor rights as just one example, but it extends beyond that. It it extends to environment. It extends to your state-owned enterprises. It extends to regulations, competition policy. So trade has got linked with so many other issues
Issues.
that China did not have to face.
That
Uh,
that's true. Like
and
it was straightforward. I would say earlier it was straightforward, less supervision from both WTO and in fact UN also. But now,
that's
like
right.
the human rights and the labor organization are more active, which is kind of, I would say, it's good for human rights. I mean, in general.
Of
Otherwise,
course, it's good for the human rights.
exploitation
It's
will
good for
keep.
the environment,
Yes, it's
right?
good
It's good for
good
the
for
environment.
good for the environment that because there was no scrutiny in any. It's not only in terms of human, but in terms of pollution, machines, safety.
That's right.
Nothing
Exactly.
was there. So that's a
That's
good
right.
step. But yes, that those are the hindrances that comes to us right now, which require like more innovative or frugal solution to figure it out.
That's right. So we'll have to make more investments
Yes.
in that, which China did not have to make, and therefore, then that affects competitiveness, right? And that's the other issue, that if India wants to be a labor-intensive manufacturing country, then it will have to upgrade its manufacturing so that it meets the standards that the rest of the world is
I,
demanding, which China did not have. So, I mean, there are issues, but services versus manufacturing is not a debate that should be had in India. It's both. Uh,
it's both, but
and even people also talk about servicification of manufacturing, which is that once you have manufacturing,
we will service
then
after.
you will have then services will grow, logistics will grow.
The third layer
In,
of manufacturing, the third layer of
that's right.
manufacturing, which has
That's
the
right. So
second level of money after like the research of the first level. Yes, I mean this
absolutely,
is yeah, that's a different dynamic and the viewpoint I got in, and it's understandable. The thing which will give more jobs to majority of people rather than just doing for for few people. I mean so that's a great dynamic to think on that. So yes, Professor, this conversation is like quite insightful, and I really enjoyed that, and I hope my audience will also enjoy the same. So thank you so much once again for joining the podcast. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Praful. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I learned as much as from you during the
That's
discussion.
an honor, like a professor saying that to me.
Really, I
Yeah.
learned a lot from you as well.
So
All the best,
yeah,
and thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for listening my podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.